Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
Today I'm on site at Snowdrift Cider with the founder, Peters Ringsrud, and we are sitting outside of the cidery, and so you're going to hear birds chirping and tractors doing what they're doing and the sounds of a cidery and an orchard in full force. So Peter, thank you for being here today. And how about if I ask you to share your story of how you started Snowdrift?
Certainly, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm a commercial fruit grower, and we got kind of tired of being at the bottom of the food chain on the commercial industry, and so you got whatever was left over. And so we wanted to do something that was vertically integrated. We had been trying to make cider with the apples that we grew, which were the dessert apples, and Horde was about the best I could come up with. And my son said, well, there's bringing a guy in from the UK to talk about making cider. And so I took the class at WSU Mount Vernon and from Peter Mitchell. And it's sort of like, oh my gosh, we're using the wrong fruit. And so then in 2006, I had an opportunity through Dean Neff, and had an orchard with some cider fruit in it in Peters. And so we had all these carboys up and down in the garage, and it was sort of like they went from pale straw in color to deep amber. The flavor characteristics were just out of this world. And so then as a family, we had to decide if it was going to be an expensive hobby or if we're going to do this for real. And so that's pretty much how we started.
So for people that don't understand, I've heard you're not the first person that said dessert fruit. What do you mean by that?
Well, dessert fruit is like the apples that you would get from the store. Reds and Goldens used to be the main ones. Now you got Cosmic Crisp and Honey Crisp, and Gala is the biggest apple producer out there. But all of those have water and sugar and acid, like Fuji's are low acid. And that works for eating. But when you have yeast consuming the sugar in the apple juice, you get a slightly alcoholic sour drink with no flavor characteristics. And so when we talk about cider fruit, we focus on a lot of the English and old American varieties that have tannins in them, and they give the flavor characteristics.
So then it's the tannins that give us the tasty cider that we are. Those of us that like cider, that's what we're looking for. Is it the tannins that bring us the flavor?
It's the tannins that are actually, and there's a whole bunch of different types of tannins, and they're what give you the flavor characteristics.
So now, as we sit here, in the background, you're going to hear a tractor. Are you growing your own fruit for the cider, or are you sourcing it from other places locally, or where do you get your cider fruit?
Okay, the majority of the cider fruit that we use for our core products and that we grow ourselves. Okay. And so we have about 8 acres. We have a test block that has about 35 different varieties in it. And then so that we use those varieties for the main apples that have the tannins in. We also have some draft products. And so that we will purchase processor cider from the source here in Wenatchee and use that as the base, and then we'll add some of our fruit cider in that to give some of the flavor components.
When you started making cider commercially, what were your ciders like? What were your first commercial ciders?
What were they like?
Well, what did you like? Have you evolved over the last 15 years or so?
Okay, the first cider, the first 2 ciders that we had was English style dry and Cliff Breaks, Cliff Breaks was made with bittersweet, bitter sharp cider apples. English Rye was mainly made with just bittersweet cider apples. And so we tried some of that, and we actually, a year before we started, took that around to some places and say, is this bottle worthy? And if this, would it be something that you would be able to want to market in your facility? And we got really good results. So we started out with those two products. What has happened is that we have added additional products. Right now we're focusing on the branch series. In the branch series, we focus more on single varietal apples. Nihao is an English bittersweet cider apple, and that's a completely dry cider. Dabinet is another bittersweet cider apple, and that has some. We've done some back sweetening on that to kind of bridge between the beginning and ending flavor characteristics. We've done Kingston Black. We've done Cap Liberty. We're doing more right now to show people what cider fruit can taste like. We also have Cornice. Cornice is a barrel-aged cider, and so you pull out some of the oak and the vanilla characteristics from the toasted oak barrels.
So what were the barrels used for before you aged the cider in it?
The best ones that we have are actually from Dry Fly, and so they were Washingto wheat whiskey. They're a distillery in Spokane. Okay.
And does that change, how does that change the flavor of, I mean, you're smiling, so how long are you aging it typically, and what does it, can you describe the changes that it makes to the cider?
Well, I can start with an example when we first tried it. We had some Pink Lady cider that we were about ready to get rid of because we didn't like the bite that it had. And so we put some of the Pink Lady into these oak barrels. And within a couple, 3 days, that bite was gone. At about a week, it started to pick up some of the oak and the vanilla characteristics. And we found that after 6 months in barrels like that, it was really pretty good. And so we figured, wow, we aren't going to screw up our cider. So we decided to start doing it that way.
Did that change the alcohol content of the cider by aging it in a whiskey barrel?
No, it does not.
It doesn't? Okay.
You get, on the first use of a whiskey barrel, you get some of the spiritus notes, but you get more the hint of the oak and the vanilla, which is more in the bourbon whiskey characteristic.
You also have, and I can't place the name of it, but it's in a clear bottle, and it's a red cider. And I apologize for not being able to say the name to you.
Red.
See, I was right. Tell us the story about that, because it's in a clear bottle and it's very appealing looking.
So it'd be about 6 years ago, or maybe a little bit longer ago. Stemelt growers had been trying to develop a red-fleshed eating apple, and so they came to us and said, "We've been trying this. It isn't going to work. Is there something you can do with it?" And so my son-in-law and I tasted them. Really, really high acid, punky on the inside, but we're kind of used to that anyway. No tannins, and so we thought, I doubt it. And then so we told them and said, well, we'll try 4 bins. And they said, well, we have 40 bins. And we looked at each other and said, like, oh my gosh, what in the world are we going to do with this? And because we pretty much had written it off because our paradigm said flavors come from tannins. This blew my paradigm of what flavor characteristics you get out of red-fleshed apples, because the red in the apple itself is a flavor characteristic that you find in berries. And so we'll get strawberry, raspberry, pomegranate, rhubarb characters out of it, and it's all from that anthocyanin in the apple itself.
So how did you guys end up turning it into a viable product then? If you thought you weren't going to be able to do anything, and by the way, did you end up taking all 40 bins?
Yes.
Okay.
We tried a whole pile of different things.
Okay. So I'd love to ask the question of what was a great idea that you had that didn't work? Because I always think there's a good story, but I kind of think here you didn't think it was going to work. But you made it work. So what happened?
I'm not so sure that I would say that we made it work. We would have written it off because that isn't where we see the flavors coming from. And so this was something so new and unique. Number one, it was really red. Number two, it had berry character that only people are getting from adding berry concentrate to it. And it worked out well. Now, it was problematic that red in it is actually very sensitive to acid level.
Okay.
And so if you let the acid level drop, then you lose your color. And right now we're having some issues with overcropping, and so we've lost a lot of the color.
What is overcropping?
In cider fruit, they're notorious for alternate bearing. So one year they'll have gangbusters, and next year they'll have nothing.
Okay.
And so when it's overcropped, like on the year that they have a lot of stuff, you don't get the flavors and the sugars and the characteristics that you want. And so in what we see now is that the last couple of years the color has gone down. The flavors are still there, but it's not it doesn't the high standard that we were looking for.
From a very layman's point of view, and like I told you before we started, I'm not a wine person, but somehow in my brain I've read or heard somewhere that grapes do well when they struggle. Is that the same with this fruit? Does it, if it's an abundant crop, you lose what you're looking for? So is it in the years that it has a little bit more challenge that brings out the characteristics, or am I just completely wrong?
Well, I don't know if we know enough about that. Next year, we're working with WSU, and we're going to be doing some deficit water because we've had some apples from around Grangeville, down in Idaho.
Okay.
And they have almost no water there. And so the flavor characteristics and the sugars were absolutely wonderful. The size was horrid.
Okay.
And I think what happens is, coming from a commercial background, we're pumping the fruit up too much, getting too much water in it. But yes, in that way, that struggled, and they did really well. But there's a difference between struggling because you're trying to grow too much on a tree or branch, and it just doesn't work. In the wine industry, you are very careful about the number of clusters that you have on your vines, because it won't have the same flavor or everything if it's overcropped.
So it is kind of similar then. In that
Correct.
Regard. Okay.
But stressing from trying to have too much growing is a different kind of stress than lack of water, sun, that kind of stuff.
What other products do you have right now? Because when we were in here a month ago, I think-ish, and I'll come back to it, but there was a Perry, so we'll table that for a second.
Okay.
But what other Apple products do you have right now? I feel like we left something out.
So we have the ciders.
Mm-hmm.
Right now we have had Pommeau, and Pommeau is made with apple juice, and it's actually made more like a port.
Oh.
And so you take the juice, we put it in the barrels, and we add the spirits to it. And so then we have to let it age in those barrels for 16 months to be able to call it Pommeau.
And what type of barrels is that aging in?
American oak barrel.
Are those from another? Are they being repurposed from another? Or are these new?
They're repurposed.
And
correct.
what was originally in those?
Like our like our Cornets.
Okay.
They were from whiskey.
Okay. Are there any other Apple products that we're missing?
Apple products as far as
varieties of ciders that you're carrying right now? I think we kind of covered them all. So let me go this direction. You sell it in bottles.
That's correct.
Do any of your products come in cans?
No, they do not.
And then are any of your products available in kegs?
I would say that about 90% of our product is actually in kegs that goes to like pubs and restaurants and that kind of stuff.
If I were to open a bottle, pour you a glass, and then properly pour you the same cider from a keg and set them in front of you without you knowing which was which, would you be able to tell?
Normally what happens is when in the bottle, we have pasteurized that, and so we heat the cider in the bottle to kill off the yeast cells. And so that pasteurization, the heat from that pasteurization actually has some flavor characteristic changes. And so it becomes more of a melding of flavors together, or what goes into the keg comes out brighter and is more
pronounced notes, so you would be able to tell.
Correct.
Okay.
So
if
there's
you had a good palate, because I wouldn't probably be able to.
Well, my palate's pretty much shot after all these years.
I've always wanted to ask that because, well, then the other question is, since you don't have any products in cans, does a cider in a can have different characteristics than that same cider if it was in a bottle or a keg?
Well, we have a collaborative product that we did with Herb Cider in Bellingham, Archibald in Kashmir.
Okay.
And so each of us provided a 1/3 of the cider that went into that, and Herb Cider put it in a can. And so we have that here.
Okay.
We're concerned about the shelf life of cider in cans, and so we haven't
Hasn't been something you've gone to?
No, when we started, we were all 750s or kegs. We got a lot of push from this distribution to go to a single serving format, and so we do 750s and 500s now. And immediately, when we went to 500s, and they started saying we want cans, it's sort of like, no. And it mainly has to do with the shelf life.
So what do you think a shelf life would be? I mean, arbitrarily of a cider in a can, is it drastically reduced? And why would that be versus, say, in a bottle?
It has malic acid attacks the lining in the can.
Okay.
And so it's the most highly corrosive acid that you can have. And so a lot of other things can be in cans for a long period of time. And they don't have that issue with bottles.
But cider
Correct.
does.
Cider does. And the canning companies have backed off and saying, well, we can only allow it out. We only guarantee it for 6 months. And I think they're backing off from that.
Oh.
And there's some different things that they're looking at. And so.
Okay.
But a can is a good single serving
it's convenient.
opportunity.
It's convenient, you know.
Well, you can take it where you don't have to worry about breakage.
Right. I know you do a Perry, but do you do any other fruit ciders other than apple and pear?
We just do apple and pear.
Okay. So I'll grind the gears here, and we're going to jump to pear without being clean about it. Your Perry's amazing. I really like that, and that was probably the first thing I ever tried. And I picked up a bottle of it in downtown Wenatchee, not knowing anything about you. And I go, oh, this sounds kind of cool, and this is neat looking. So the label worked, and I find it delicious. How did you start doing a pear product?
Well, when we were first getting started, my daughter and son-in-law, they decided to sell their condo, quit their jobs, and go biking in Europe for a year.
That sounds great, actually.
And when they were over there, we went over and visited them in the West Country in the UK. And we stayed in Bath. And then we toured a bunch of different cideries and the like. And probably the high point was when we had a chance to tour and go to Tom Oliver's place in Herefordshire. Tom Oliver sells cider in Perry, but he does all bottle conditioned, and he's one of the triumphant of the three head three in the Perry industry in the UK.
Okay.
And so we had a wonderful time. We tried a whole bunch of different Perries and it was sort of like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely incredible. And so when we got back, we said, we really need to try it. And we'd been talking about doing a Perry. And so we decided, well, okay, we will do what we now call a reserve Perry with our Perry pears and some heirloom pears. We get some heirloom pears from Scott McManus and Cashmere. And it was really good. And we actually did the champagne method like Tom did.
So I'm going to ask you to stop right there. And I'm going to ask you to explain the champagne method, please.
Okay, so the simple way is saying that's in-bottle fermentation.
Okay.
And so when you talk about method ancestral, that means that it's just bottle conditioned. And so you add the yeast, or you get it down to certain in the fermentation process, and then you cork it or crown it and let the yeast do its job and develop in the carbonation. In method champenois, what we do is we let it go completely through fermentation and let it age in stainless for about 18 months to 2 years, and then we'll start in bottle fermentation. So we'll take that out, we'll bottle it, add a little bit of nutrients and some sugar and yeast to it, and then let it ferment in the bottle again. And so it gets a different bubble and it gets a different flavor characteristic because the cider is on the lees, which is the dead yeast cells in the bottom of the bottle. And so then we will take it and we'll put it up on neck down, and we'll swirl it, and you can see it, see the current in the bottle loosen the lees or the sediment in the bottom, and then we will riddle it. And so for about 2 weeks, we'll turn it about a third turn, it's neck down, and after that, then we'll let it sit, and then we'll disgorge it. And so we have some large ice chests that we do salt brine, like making ice cream,
right?
And freeze the neck of the bottle, and then we will take it out and start raising it up and pop the cap off, and it will blow the ice plug out the end, and a little bit of foaming out of the end, and then we'll take that back and top it up, and we use a dosage, a little additional invert sugar and a little bit of spirits in it, and then cork it, and it's ready to go.
So this is a very labor-intensive process.
It's a pain.
I had no idea. I have no idea about lots of things in this, but I had no idea that there was this many steps in the process. Because, being blunt, that bottle of Perry's not a price point I was expecting. No, I'm not complaining. When I bought it, I didn't look, and I'm like, oh, but it was amazing. But I had no idea, zero idea, that there was as many steps.
Correct. We
Yeah.
We also have a cider maker's reserve, which uses the champagne method on our high-end
And is
cider.
that the same? All those steps are the same?
Same steps, exactly.
Wow. Okay. It's delicious, so please keep doing it. How has the Perry been received in the marketplace?
We have, we actually have 2 Perries,
Okay.
and one is called semi-dry Perry, and that's in 500 ml bottles.
Right.
And so that uses like Anjou pears and the cider from Anjou pears, and then we blend in some of the Perry pears to give some of the flavor characteristics. And that's been accepted really well. That has a lot lower price point.
Sure.
The price point is a challenge for the champagne method.
Well, it's interesting because it's not that expensive. I mean, if I were to buy a bottle of it here today, what is retail at?
$40.
Okay. My friends that drink wine don't blink an eye at $40 bottles of wine.
That's true.
So I think we got to reframe this conversation.
Well, when we have people come to the tasting room from a wine background, they'll say is, everything's too cheap. Everything's too cheap. But when we're in distribution, we have to take a look at price point on the shelf.
Right.
Do you want to move one bottle, or do you want to move several cases?
Right. But I still don't think that 40. It was
A shock.
shock's not the right word. It was like, oh, it gave me pause. I bought more than one though, so it's no complaints. But I had no idea. I think, how do you share that knowledge though with the consumer that this is? I'm stunned at how intensive it is.
Oh, you mean the process?
Yeah, I mean, if consumer walks into a store and sees a bottle and they go $40, and they have no knowledge about what went into it, versus if they went in and went all of it went into it, it's $40. Like, it's like changing that mindset of the consumer. How do you do that? How do you get the word out about this method, and how does one educate the consumer?
What we have found really the best way that works is when people come out to the tasting room, or if we go, or if we have an event where we go somewhere and they have a chance to try it.
So I'm going to ask you if you do a lot of events, knowing full well that for the last year and a half the answer to that was no. But prior to the pandemic, were you guys getting out and showcasing your products at events?
We were doing that. I wasn't, but we had a couple people that were actually trying to hit up the main events. Mm-hmm. What kind of some of the problem there is they're on a weekend where I have the tasting room open and I really need to be here.
Sure.
And so some events are really, really good, and some events are questionable.
I think we've just described every event, haven't we? So the champagne method, that uses a different yeast than quote-unquote normal cider? Are you using the same yeasts across all of your products?
We use a champagne yeast across all of our products because we like the way what that does. Okay. We were doing with a certain champagne yeast, which was a good yeast that was could restart stuck fermentation. So if you have a wild ferment that starts, this would clean it up and finish off with a good finish. We've had to change. We've changed to a different champagne yeast that does not produce sulfur, but it has to ferment at a higher temperature. But that's about the only difference.
So how about we have yeast 101? What's the difference between a champagne yeast and another type of yeast. Why are you calling it champagne yeast? What's the difference?
What's the difference? They've been pretty much developed to do the champagne, and they'll do more on the fusels and that kind of stuff. Okay. Where there's a lot of the red wine yeast and that kind of stuff, they don't give the flavor characteristics that we want. And I've not been happy with with any of the cider yeast that people have had. So it just works the best.
Okay. And then you say that it has to ferment at a higher temperature.
The newest one we have has a ferment at a higher temperature.
And what temperature is that approximately?
It's got to be 50, a little above 51.
Okay.
Where the earlier champagne yeast, we could actually put it in when we laid it in bottles in the barrel room at 40, 44. It worked fine, but this other one, you move in there and it stops. Then you have to move it back out and heat it up so get it going again. And if you get it down to below its 51 degrees, then it stops.
So what impact does temperature have on flavor then, or does it?
Temperature has a couple different. We like to ferment our ciders at no higher than 60, 62, 64 degrees. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to control the rate of fermentation by temperature. The whole tank will go exothermic if you don't chill the tank.
Exothermic?
It could heat up to 80 some degrees just because of the heat of the fermentation. And so at that point, it just goes nuts and you blow all your flavor characteristics out the top.
So by keeping it on a controlled lower temperature, then that's keeping those flavor characteristics that you're looking for more intact.
That's correct.
Okay, so
in the cider itself, as opposed to just blowing off molecules out the top.
Okay, all right. Should have thought this was going to be a science lesson, but I guess I didn't. But
well, the problem is you're talking to an engineer.
I'm actually finding it fascinating. There might not be an answer to this question. What's on the horizon for Snowdrift? New product? Anything? You guys, and I'm putting you on the spot. No product is fine. But is there anything you guys are working on?
When we're dependent on distribution, with Wade, distributors have been coming together and being bought out by larger distributors. They're pretty much saying this is what the price point needs to be. And our Forefathers is a good product that is a keg product, which uses processor fruit and cider fruit. And we're able to come in at the price point that works for them, but with flavor characteristics from cider fruit in it. And so there's a couple other things we're looking at that would more be seasonal. In the past, we've had winter red, which was a concentrated red, and the colors aren't there. And so we're looking at maybe doing kind of maybe a spiced winter cider. And we put together a recipe for hot spice cider using cornice and that kind of stuff. And I mean, you put almost nothing in it, and you get some of that flavor characteristic. Like you put it in a barrel, and you pick up the oak and the vanilla. And so that's one thing we're looking at. But we're wanting to focus more back on the single varietals. We have a couple rows of Frocon Rouge, which is a French cider apple that we'll probably do more with that.
So as I look over to my right for the visual, when you say row, how many trees are we talking about?
In a row?
In your rows?
Probably about 120.
So you've got 240 of those trees.
Correct. Well, plus some in our test block back here. But yeah.
And are they basically looking like these trees right over here, or do you have them on?
No, they're not on a trellis system like here, which is Cosmic Crisp.
Okay.
They've been grafted over from the Red Delicious, and so
more like what I think a traditional apple tree looks like versus
freestanding.
Freestanding. Thank you. Because when you drive around, so like I told you before, when we moved over here and we drove around, I'm like, what's going on with all these trees? I mean, they were all trellised up, and I'm used to looking at an apple tree that looks like you could climb on it.
Like the Granny Smith to your right.
Yes, and that's not what I see a lot of. I see a lot of the trellis stuff here.
So what's really happening is that you're in a trellis system. You're providing the support to it, and technically you're just growing a fruiting branch.
Okay.
And so there's another term that they use. They talk about a tree wall or a fruiting wall, and so it's a very controlled environment and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And so you're looking at very high production. When you have to develop, like the Granny Smith here, when you have to develop the trunk and the leaders and all that kind of stuff, a tree wall can have fruit in 3 years.
Right.
This way you have to spend a lot of time and energy to bring it up to to support itself. Now when we graft, we'll go through and we'll cut off virtually everything and then put in 6 signs, and so you still got all the SCIONs.
Thank you.
And the root is pushing so much energy. We'll get 8 feet of growth on those signs that are 6-7 inches long.
So you're taking a Red Delicious.
That's correct.
Tree, cutting it back, right?
Well, more than just cutting it back.
Okay. And then you're grafting on the cider fruit.
Correct.
So if we were to go do that today, take and graft on 6 signs, when would that be producing fruit?
I have 4 rows that we grafted 2 years ago.
Okay.
And so they have fruit on them this year. I'm not going to let them produce fruit because I want them to fill out first. But I have some that is in its 3rd year, and it will be growing its first crop this year.
So you'll go and remove the fruit from the 2-year-olds.
That's
so that
correct.
That energy will go, and the tree will put energy into building itself versus
building the structure.
Fruit.
Correct.
Okay. So in 3 years or 3 years-ish, 3-4 years, you can start to have a crop of apples off of a graft.
So off of those trees out there, in 3 years, you will probably have a 20% crop.
Okay.
And then that will
keep growing.
Keep going.
So when would you be fully productive, 100% crop?
By the 5th year.
5th year. Okay.
The problem is throttling them back and getting a load on them so they'll stop growing so much.
So this Granny Smith here, that you and I could see, how old is this tree? Ish.
20-ish.
20 years. And it's got apples on it. It's got fruit.
Correct.
It's not really in production. I mean, you probably picked it, but is that...
It's only for private use.
Right. If it were in commercial production use, would it still be viable at 20 years?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The problem in the fruit industry is you have new, sexy, hot items that come up.
Right.
And so we've gone through Honey Crisp, and Honey Crisp is still good. Now it's Cosmic Crisp, and so people are looking for the latest and greatest, and returns on
Granny Smith.
returns on Red Delicious are really suck.
Right.
And so when you're comparing that with hundreds of dollars, well, $900 for Cosmic Crisp and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. when you're not being an orchardist and a cider maker, what do you do for fun?
Fun? What's my wife and I enjoy getting out and doing. We used to do a lot of hiking, but right now we get out and enjoying the flowers and the birds and that kind of stuff. And so we'll do a lot of day hikes in and around the area.
So give me an example of a day hike you guys like.
Oh, Marion and Claire, we'll do that 4 or 5 times a year.
I don't know where that's at.
You go up to like Mission Ridge
Okay.
and the parking lot, and then off on the right-hand side, there's a trail that goes up to Claire and Marion.
Okay.
And so that's been one of our favorites. But we like getting up in the Stevens Pass area. I like even going out to Ancient Lake in the spring.
Okay.
We enjoy wildflowers, and so that's what we look for.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot. We have an abundance of that. The right time of year. So how do you like living in the Wenatchee area? I mean, we moved over here 4 years ago. I can tell you my opinion, but you've been here a long time. Nothing's changed.
Well, I grew up in Cashmere.
Oh, nothing's changed there at all.
And all I wanted to do is get away.
Okay.
And my dad said, well, I think you should stick around and earn some money and buy an orchard and that kind of stuff. And I said, no, I want to do something. I do not want to have my life dictated by the frost and the bugs and that kind of stuff. And so I went to the U, and I'm a civil engineer, worked 5 years in the Seattle area, and my wife and I said, she's from Ephrata. We really don't want to raise a family over here, and so I tried to transfer back in to the district here, and didn't work. It was closed. And so I happened to mention to my father-in-law, it'd be really nice. I'm thinking about wanting to go back into orcharding again. And he jumped all over that, and it's sort of like I didn't understand. I do now. To get his kids back home closer.
Right.
And so my dad had a lot of I told you so's. I told you so. And farming is in your blood, and it's hard to beat. So.
Well, it's the easiest way to make a living. I mean, I've never met anybody in the agricultural business that wouldn't have thrown something at me for saying that. I don't, and you had said frost and bugs and all that. I don't have the stomach for it. I applaud you and admire you, and we need you, but not for me.
Well, when we purchased the orchard, we were looking at, I think it was $3,000 an acre.
Okay.
And you can't touch anything around here for 10 times that.
Probably more like 20 times that.
And so
probably looking at 60 an acre now, right?
And you can't handle that the P&I on that kind of debt. And so it's gotten to the point where it's forcing other ways of moving the industry. And so, the Goldens in the bottom of the orchard, they're an older block, and they've been doing 100 bins to the acre. And
did you say 100 bins to the acre?
Uh-huh.
Wow. Okay.
And so the high density stuff on these tree walls, they're doing 100 bins, 200 bins, that kind of stuff to the acre. And so if it's not producing, if it's below 100 bins, I mean, they're looking at something different.
I read somewhere, the big sign is you come into Wenatchee, Wenatchee area. It does say area in small print, but Wenatchee, apple capital of the world, right? There's that big sign that we all see. And growing up on the west side, I went to school in Ellensburg at Central. Wenatchee apples. I mean, that's just, those two words are linked together. And I read in the paper, it was either 5 or 7 acres of apples is all that's left in the city of Wenatchee. I was really...
It doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't... It surprised me when I read it, and then I think about it, it doesn't surprise me. But...
Well, when you come out here, and we're not in town...
Right.
When you come out here, especially like the arterials, you have to have spray drift, like is horrendous.
Right.
And people don't like hearing the sprayer going off at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, why does it have to be at 4 a.m.?
You might be the only time that it's going to be cool enough and no wind.
Right.
Like my brother has a PTO sprayer, and that's noisy. My neighbor has an engine driven that's twice as noisy.
Is that the blade you see up on this? Like, I see these towers with, like, right there.
Oh, those are wind machines. That's frost control.
Frost control. Does that actually work?
You betcha.
Interesting.
So what it's doing is cold air flows down through the low spots. So like behind you, in front of the house there, it flows down through there and then ponds up in the bottom down there. And so the wind machines, they not only spin, but they also rotate. And so they're mixing the warmer air in with the colder air.
Okay. Last question before we get going and wrap this up. Putting you on the spot, hopefully in a good way. You said before we hit record, pandemic was a timeout for all of us. But as a business, what lessons have you learned as we're getting through the pandemic as far as Snowdrift goes? Because I think the apple orchards were not as... Were they affected? Was your commercial fruit affected by the pandemic all that much?
Not to the extent that ours was. I mean
the cider.
The cider, okay. Correct.
But as a business, what did you adjust what you were doing to stay viable?
So what we did is with the distributors, they have about 6 months supply, and so when things shut down, I mean, we had nothing going on. And so we focused more on internet sales. Mm-hmm. We didn't make a lot, but we had enough cash flow that really worked. And so it really helped us change back to focusing more on the retail side, cider club, all of those type of things. And
take a time out until that goes, because he's really loud right now, and I want to hear that cider club part once again. So how long is that PTO? Oh, so I've never actually seen it working. So how long can it run before he has to fill it up again?
The sprayer is a 400-gallon sprayer.
Okay.
And so he's doing 200 gallons to the acre, so it's 2 acres, and so he's driving about 2 miles an hour. So.
Okay. All right. So let's go back. Let's pick up at the cider club.
So what we looked at in this timeout is sort of like, what can we do to move products? And so we did some specialty offerings. We did some vertical products from several years back, and so we talked about 5 o'clock at home, and so we had, and we were offering free shipping.
Okay.
And we had very good response with that. Cider Club is an opportunity where there's significant savings on Cider Club. I would say probably 90% of our cider clubs are out of town, and so we ship to them, and so that works.
Is there must be challenges in shipping alcohol, though. And bottles. I mean, you're shipping a breakable item that's got alcohol in it.
Well, but what we do is we have to have special shipping containers.
Okay.
So we just don't take a case of cider and
Throw it in the
then ship it. But then we have a license through UPS for local in-state.
Okay.
And then we use a compliant shipper for all the other shipping that we do
Out of state.
Out of state. So
Okay. I've always wondered that about because other businesses that I've talked to, they've kind of, the word that's been overused the most, pivoted towards retail. This fulfillment aspect is different. I'm going to guess that if your distributor's placing an order, it's for a larger number of cases than if Bill Smith is ordering a couple of bottles to be shipped to Seattle.
Well, and
shipping.
Yeah, and the distributor, with what we see, we sell more kegs than cases.
Okay.
And people coming out here in the cider club, they don't have access to the keg. Well, we have some people who do buy kegs from us.
Oh.
But most of what we do is send bottles.
So you got the cider club. I don't want to say renewed, but you revisited retail.
Yeah, we do a lot of online sales yet. The tasting area with COVID, we couldn't do any tasting at the bar.
Right.
And so then we had our winter time. Okay, as long as you tasted outside, or you had freezing cold air flowing through where you're trying to taste, and it's sort of like. But what it's done is it allowed us to say, we have time and we have space that we can offer people.
Right.
And so we have some picnic tables here that people can come out, they can bring food with their friends, and they can do tastings, or they can buy flights, or they can buy bottles to share, and that kind of stuff, and hang out.
So let's wrap up by you telling our listeners where they can find Snowdrift.
Right at this point, we're distributing both West Side and East Side. The majority of the places we have in the West Side would be like Total Wine and some of the bottle shops and that. We're less served on Eastern Washington, but in Wenatchee, the liquor store on 9th Street and Plaza Superjet,
Yep.
they have, that's the best bottle shop there is in town.
It's great.
And but those type of things. And so probably our best client right now is actually Leavenworth Cider Company in Leavenworth.
So tasting room is open.
Tasting room is open from noon to 5 on Friday and Saturday. But if people want to make an appointment, that way I can get changed out of my orchard clothes, and we're able to do it almost any time during the week.
And online, the address to find you?
Okay. It's online both with with our website and my email address, and my number is there online.
Okay.
So.
And it's snowdriftcider.com, correct?
Snowdriftcider.com.
Right. We'll put a link below so that people can click on that easily. What question didn't I ask? Did I not ask a question that you want to get out there?
Well, I think I've said enough.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you making time out of your busy orchard day to let me sit outside with you, and because it's a beautiful day, and I appreciate it. I learned a ton, which is why I do this. So thank you so much for making this happen.
Well, thank you so much for considering us.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.